Hi there everyone, I hope I find you well and it's really nice to have your company, and today we're going to be doing a box opening and review with a product that Hornby sent me through a review copy, and I'm quite excited to be able to take a closer look at this. I do have an earlier release from Bachmann which is a similar liveried model, and I really want to compare that with the new Hornby release. So without further ado, let's take a closer look. Well, what we have here is the Hornby Mk1 full brake coach, but it's in the livery of the re-railing trains. And these were a set of coaches that had gone on into a departmental use, and they tended to go along with things like the breakdown cranes. And these full brakes would have contained an assortment of jacks, packing equipment, that kind of thing, that would have been necessary to be able to get wagons, locomotives back on the track whenever they came off. So pretty useful piece of kit back in their day, and it's nice to see models of these departmental liveried coaches coming on through. So we've got a catalogue number R4903. It's been out a little while, and there are others as well that Hornby have produced in this same livery to allow you to start to build up a train of these things. And coupled with the Bachmann releases that came out in partnership with Model Zone and Invicta Models some time back, you can actually get a good representation in your fleet. Now, don't forget, I'd like to draw attention to the affiliate links that we've got down below, and these take you straight through to Hatton's, and you can help out the show and also get hold of one of these yourself by following those links and seeing if that's something that you're interested in. But we've got this here. It's in the pretty standard Hornby rolling stock box, and I do like this new packaging that, well, actually we've had it for a couple of years now, but it's the same form factor as all the other manufacturers are using, and I find it's just really useful to be able to store these boxes away because they all tessellate with each other. You know, tessellate, that's a great word. Write that down. You should use that more often in everyday conversation. So I'm going to show you the end there, R4903 BR Re-Railing Mk1 BG coach, and we got the running number 975613, and that's slightly important because Hornby have made sure that the running number on this model does differ from the Mk1 BG in this livery that Bachmann brought out some time ago. Right, I'm going to get myself into this. It's come from Hornby, and it's been really kind of Hornby to send over this review copy for me to take a closer look at. So I haven't had it out of the box yet. I'm relying on first impressions, and I think that, you know, as when a modeler is browsing in a model shop and looking over these models, sometimes first impressions do count for a lot. So I think it's important to get my first impressions on this model. It's pretty easy to get it out of the packaging, and I've noticed there that we do have this little tiny bag, and this is a representation of the knuckle couplings that some of these coaches and a lot of rolling stock now have, rather than the 3-link couplings. These aren't actually functioning ones, but I guess that these, yeah, I see on the end there, on the buffer beam, you've got a little slot there that these can be inserted into, and probably a little dab of glue would help them not come adrift, and they don't interfere with the tension lock couplings that are on there as well. So actually there's a good little addition there that you can put on yourself, and I'm guessing that they've not been put on from the factory because they'd probably get knocked or fouled in the box on the packaging. So they're there for you to fit if you so choose, but they don't really detract from the model if you decide not to go ahead and do that. Hornby have captured the essence of the Mk1 BG pretty well. Now, we have previously reviewed one of the Hornby Mk1 BGs when they first reached the market, because I was very interested to see how Hornby would do coming into a market that already had a very well established competitor. And as I felt at the time, it was a really good effort, and they'd managed to tick pretty much all the boxes, as well as keeping the price lower than the competition. And in these days of ever-escalating prices, that is actually a really important consideration. So it's nice to be able to see that you can add to your Mk1 fleet without having to pay huge amounts. The RRP on these is still quite expensive, but compared to the competition, it's not quite as much. So we're looking at just under the £40 mark, but I've seen them around at a variety of different retailers down to the £30, £31 mark. And if you give it a bit longer, then maybe they'll come down a bit more, but you take your chances with that, whether they reach the sales or whether they're actually popular enough that they do sell out. My first impression is that the tempo printing is crisp and sharp, and we see this in fairness from all the manufacturers now. The bar really has been moved higher and higher, and there's no disappointment here. The tempo printing is crisp and clean, and we've also got these overhead warning flashes, and I'm struggling with my Mark 1.0 eyes to read those, but I've got every faith that under very close magnification we're going to be able to actually read all of the information on here. We've got flush glazing that's nicely fitted in, and I don't like doing this because sometimes, you get a model and you think, oh, I wonder how securely they are put in, and then doink, the window falls back in, and then you have the devil's own job to actually dismantle the thing to push the windows back in. I remember many years ago there being a big problem with the 50-foot LMS full brake from Bachmann, where if you weren't careful, you could push the windows in. But these are actually pretty well in there, and that's important for me because when you're picking it up, you're going to end up invariably, no matter how careful you are, putting some pressure on these windows. So the fact that they are pretty securely in there is a really good plus for me, because I hate having to go fishing for windows that have fallen into rolling stock and locomotives. Now, for me, the underframe detail is really what makes the Hornby model stand out as special. Now, coming to the party second to a party that already had a long established and actually a pretty good competitor, they had to do something to go the extra mile. And for me, where they've excelled is with the bogies and the underframe detail. And it's nice to see actually in the Hornby range that there's a lot more coming through, including, I believe I saw, some of the types that Bachmann has neglected, Hornby is starting to bring to the market, but we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. On the bogie details, you can see air through underneath the axle boxes and where the tie bars are, and that's perfectly prototypical, and it's good to see. The brake blocks, however, don't line up with the wheels, but I think that's probably a limitation of being able to mould the bogie all as one piece, and actually, from normal viewing angles, it doesn't really detract. And I've said this about a lot of wagons from other manufacturers as well, that really sometimes it's very easy to pick fault with a model for minor things which have actually helped keep the costs dramatically down. And if you were having these as separately applied pieces, that would really bump up the cost. So actually sometimes a compromise like that is pretty good, and we've seen that from all manufacturers, so it's not a specific criticism against Hornby. We've also got separately applied underframe battery boxes, but they are pretty firmly attached on there. At least I think they're separately applied. Well, actually, I think they're moulded. That's interesting because, at first look, I'm thinking, look at all these separately applied pieces. But looking in there, they do actually appear to be part of the moulding. And that's really clever, if that is indeed what Hornby have done, because making it all one moulding keeps the costs down. But if you can do that without compromising quality, then that is a win-win, both for the manufacturer and for the end consumer. We do have other separately applied detail. I have to assume that some of this other stuff is separately, although actually, I don't think it is, you know. I think Hornby have found a way of moulding all this underframe detail in a way that hasn't compromised the finesse and the fidelity of it. But that is, well, certainly, if it is a separately applied detail, it's well in there. I can't see any gaps, and, you know, I'm really pulling on that. I wouldn't normally do this to a model, but that is firmly on there. That is pretty good. We do have, I think these are dynamos. These would be to provide power to the train. And the way that these actually worked on the full-scale prototypes is there was a belt that ran to the axle on the bogie, and of course on the full-sized railways they don't have the kind of severe curves that you have on a model railway, so the bogies don't actually move as far as you'd think. So with the flexibility of a belt, you can have a dynamo running when the train's moving that provides power to the train, and so that I believe is what that is, but you don't get modelled the belt, which understandably so. We've also got the vacuum brake cylinders. Again, I'm not sure whether they are separately applied, but they're certainly very, very finely detailed. I do like those, and even if they are separately applied, they are well on there. So we don't get this kind of shower of bits that we've, you know, sometimes see from other manufacturers. The actual bogies themselves appear to be clip-on. I'm not seeing a screw or anything, and just there, I can... Yeah, that's actually an interesting thing. Again, it's nice to be sent the review samples because you can be a little bit more ham-fisted and pull them apart like this to be able to really give a good full review, because you're not quite so worried about damaging something that you've paid money for. But actually, they are intended to come out like that. And that is quite a nice touch. And again, it keeps the number of parts in this model down, which again keeps the cost down. And you can also, with the bogie removed, I'm seeing there, you can see that the top part of this model appears to be held on with clips. So taking this apart, it would seem, if you wanted to, say, put people in it, which is something that some manufacturers have brought out coaches that have sat down people inside them, but it really bumps up the cost. So if you want to do that yourself, then it does look to me like this Hornby offering is a lot easier to get into. And let's just see how easily that goes back in. Clunk clip every trip, and that plastic's not brittle, it's not breaking those off. The couplings, they're in a standard NEM pocket, and there's no close coupling mechanism that we've seen from Bachmann, but in terms of, I've had some of the Hornby coaches running and I've not actually found a problem. So it's nice to see some quite intelligent ways that they've worked to keep the cost down. In terms of other finishing of the details, we've got actually quite a prominent rib detail on the roof. But it's something that I know that Bachmann, when they brought out their Mk1s, they initially had this quite pronounced rib detail. People complained, oh, it's very pronounced, and British Rail were actually quite proud of the way that they put together these roofs to minimise any seams. So when they retooled, they tooled them without the seams, and people complained again. So my personal preference is actually to have the seams moulded like this, because even though they're probably quite overscale, to the eye in model form, it looks right. And what I've found is that sometimes you have to make certain compromises in model form to look right, which actually aren't in keeping with the prototype. It seems very strange, but sometimes when you scale things down, it does actually help to make certain things more prominent. The torpedo vents, they are nicely moulded, but they do appear, I'm trying to move them there, they do appear to be, again, moulded on, but it doesn't detract for having that as a moulded on detail. So I'm going to give it to the Hornby model. I think that's absolutely fine. Where the moulded on detail, I feel, falls down a little bit is with this livery application on the ends, and it's with these handrails that come up here and onto the roof. You can see where they're moulded in the black on the roof. They look absolutely fine. I wouldn't say that there's any detraction with that. But the yellow is pretty cruel to this, and it does show that that is moulded on detail rather than separately applied. That said, I know that when I did a review on the Blood and Custard liveried Mk1 BG when they first came out, that has full black ends, and on that livery it works perfectly fine. So I just think it's an unfortunate compromise of this livery, and you know, sometimes you've got to take a compromise when making models. The end corridor connections, they're nicely done. We've got the representation of the Corsatina corridor connections on there, and the door in the closed position inside there. It's all pretty reasonable to me. We've also got this cantrail line in a kind of orangey red, and that is actually really nicely done. It's a shame with the moulded on handrail there that kind of emphasizes it where it goes around and over, but again, it's a limitation of the tempo printed and moulded on detail. On other liveries, it works absolutely fine. The buffers, again, nicely done, and it's been a criticism of mine of some manufacturers' models that the buffers aren't really secured in very well, but I'm really pulling on that, and these buffers are actually nicely secured. And there's nothing worse than getting a model out of a box, running it on your layout, and then noticing at the end of the session that buffers have gone missing, and then hunting for them, trying to work out where they might have gone. So having well secured on buffers is actually a big plus for me. Now we've reached the stage where overall I'm really quite pleased with this model. I think it's a good model, and notwithstanding the minor detractions that I found, I think that this is a good solid effort from Hornby. But one of the reasons that I was quite interested to be able to review this livery on the Hornby model is because I've had in my collection since they came out the Bachmann version. And I believe this may have been produced as a limited edition for either Model Zone or Invicta models. But certainly it gives me this ideal opportunity to be able to compare the two. This is actually probably the cruelest of comparisons, but give Hornby their due. They knew that I was planning this comparison when we talked about getting this review copy, and they were still quite happy for me to go ahead and do this. And you know, that's great credit to a manufacturer that they know that I'm going to be very critical, and they're still happy for me to do this. So let's have a look. On the Bachmann model, we get the representation of bars on the window. They're moulded on, but they do work quite well. On the Hornby model, we don't get that. The livery application is crisp on both of them. In terms of colour, again, there would be natural variance between these in real life. So the Hornby coach is a slightly lighter lemon yellow, but what I can see is that the Hornby livery is slightly more complex because we've got that orangey red cant rail around the top, and we've also got all of the overhead warning flashes on there as well. So, you know, we've got a difference between the two. They are modelled on different prototypes, so without actually seeing actual photographs of the two, I'd have to say that they're probably both accurate to a representation of the liveries of the originals. On the Bachmann model, there does seem to be a little bit of overprint on the tempo on these footboards, these sort of steps. Now I'm looking to see, I think that I'm not actually sure, they may actually be moulded on detail, but the tempo printing has in places just slightly let it down. In particular, you can see on the end of this one a little bit of overprint, and you know, I don't know whether that's a one-off. I've got a slightly shifted one from the production run, but it's there. On the Hornby model, these do appear to be, again, I'm not sure if they're separately applied or moulded on, but the actual application of the black is much crisper, and the entire step rather than the edge is done in black, and I think that works marginally better, but we really are splitting hairs here. On the roof detail, you can see that the Bachmann model doesn't have those roof seams. And whilst that may be more in keeping with the prototype, I firmly believe that in model form, having these ribs on the roof is kind of what your eye expects to see. So I'd go with the Hornby model. To me, it looks better in model form. It's very difficult to put your finger on it, but actually the Bachmann one is probably more accurate to the prototype, but just in model form, I think each has their pros and cons. I wouldn't like to call it. Now, the Bachmann model has separately applied metal handrails on the top and the ends. And this is an area where I felt on the Hornby model, those that are on where they're a similar colour to the background, those work for me. But on the end of the coach, the moulded on handrail doesn't work as well, and I think that the Bachmann model clinches that with the separately applied wire handrail. That said, you know, other liveries, I felt it worked perfectly well on the Hornby model. So, you know, you pays your money, you takes your choice, and I do feel that the lower cost price of the Hornby model does forgive a lot of sins, and there isn't really a lot of sins on here, but you know, we've talked about that with some of the Oxford rail models, that whilst some people have complained about the quality not being quite as good on those, the price does forgive a lot. Now, when we look at the underframe detail, this for me was one of the areas that I felt that the Hornby model had an element of finesse to it, more finesse. The Bachmann model is really good, but those bogies, that for me is the clincher. Now, it could well be that the Bachmann model has been around for a while, so the moulds that these are being made from have had a lot of mileage, and it starts to make ever so slightly fuzzy some of the details. So when I'm looking at the rivet detail, it's not perhaps quite as crisp and as sharp as the same detail that we see on the Hornby model. And you do see a lot of this detail when they're running. And for me, the difference in the bogies is quite pronounced, and I would firmly call it in the favour of the Hornby model. Overall, I have to say that this is a good solid release from Hornby in a livery which does actually work pretty well. The detractions for me are those moulded on pipework and handrails, but it's not a major detraction. I'm going to give this coach a good solid 8.5 out of 10. I think it's a good release, it has its good points, and they've made sure to not copy directly the competition, so both of these will run quite happily in the same train. Well, I hope you found that video really informative. Don't forget that if you're struggling to find one of these models yourself and you're really interested in getting one, then you can follow the affiliated links that we got down below. You'll find them there, and that'll take you straight to the Hattons website, where you can pick up your own and also help out the channel in the process. But until next time, big thanks to Hornby for sending over this review copy for me to take a closer look at. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope that we'll see you again here next time on the channel. But until then, take really good care of yourself. I'll see you then. Bye for now. Today's video has been brought to you in part thanks to the generous donation of my fans on Patreon. And a huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Mark Anthony, Michael Churchwood, Bob Threeton, Alec Ralph, Anthony Hunt, William Wade, Wayne Johns, and Offshore Allen. If you'd like to help support the show, head on over to patreon.com/Jennifer Kirk. Thank you. Today's video has been brought to you by my books, Bringing Home the Stars, Twinkle Little Star, and also you can get the complete comic collections of All Over the House, Books 1, Books 2, and also the wacky zany Life of Knob T Mouse. Thanks, and catch you later.